Okay, this is one of my videos in the dark, and I'm gonna talk about something, man. And this, I had a debate. Well, it really wasn't a debate, but it's a channel that I've subscribed to. A pretty damn good channel. It's called Kings and Generals. And Kings and Generals basically it talks about battles and stuff that happened. Back during the time. During it talked about many of the battles that happened in history, whether it be the Crusades, the Mongol invasion, um, the rise of the Caliphate out of Arabia. It talked about the Viking. It talked about many battles with the Romans and Greeks and shit like that. It's a great channel. I'll go sub it. It talk even about World War II and shit. The Pacific War, which I really like documentaries and shit like that because I like looking at like World War II and War documentaries. I'm a real big fan of World at War and shit like that. That talked about the D-Day, the D-Day invasion of Normandy with the Americans and the British. But yeah, I really like that. But anyway, I'm gonna talk about something that nobody fails to talk about. And I was raised pretty much in the South in Texas, and then you had Northern black people who didn't understand why you had uh, black people with Confederate flags. So they didn't have understand. They scratched their head because everybody really don't really know history, and there's a lot of history behind that Confederate flag or that rebel flag. Because the rebel flag is actually was a flag pretty much like the red, black, and green flag that African Americans used. It was a flag saying that we going against the status quo. It's pretty much like the Texas flag. The Texas flag is the same thing. Now it's the state flag, but it was the flag saying we seceded from the Union. We don't want to be part of the Union. So the Confederate flag was that. So up under this Confederate flag, it's a misconception that they always would tell you in history that it was a war brother against brother. But when you actually look at the concept, what they mean by brother versus brother, and your idea, what most people idea was white Southerners getting up and fighting for the Confederacy. Now I'm gonna tell you why that's not even logical, and that ain't really what happened down in the South. They ain't gonna tell you this what really happened in the South, and they actually brung this issue up. If you all used to look at this movie or this show called Shameless, where the white dude had got a letter from his family that lived down in Kentucky. So him and his black girlfriend went down to a get together on his family side because he was adopted by another white family. They adopted him, so he went down there to finally meet his family on his family, his real actual family, and they was a whole bunch of southern rednecks. But he noticed that you had a lot of black women married to white men in this thing. So he like, damn, I guess it's genetics. So the white woman that was his aunt said he like looked around and he noticed all the white men with black women with biracial kids running all around running around the motherfucking running around. So when you look at the picture, it was a picture of this Confederate general with two black slaves who were soldiers that were his bodyguards. So now this Showtime showing you all something in the show. Now I'm gonna get to something, and it's gonna be this is not brain boggling to figure out. if you really want to look at the Confederate, the Civil War, they will make you think that it was white Southerners fighting against white Northerners. They'll give you this notion that those Confederates had an army of white soldiers fighting. You had only a few white Confederates who were fighting for the Confederacy, and those people those were the sons who were officers and shit like that led black slaves into battle. So the only reason why it started being more white people in the war, because they just the Confederates say, look, we'll pay y'all to fight for us. So actually they started paying white Southerners to fight for them, because majority of the Southerners who were poor, who were not the aristocratic Southern white people of the South, they went to fight for the Union. So you had a lot of Southerners fighting for the Union Army, which they ain't gonna tell you, but you had a lot of slaves fighting in a lot of the battles and winning a lot of the battles. You had Confederates training slaves to fight fight for their freedom. They'll tell them, the slaves, if you fight for us, we'll give you certain things that you didn't normally get. So you had a lot of those black slaves who were loyal to their slave masters, that will fight to the death for their slave masters. And some of them, those battles that they ain't gonna show you, because they ain't gonna show you in American history. They'll have to tell you the truth, that you had black slave soldiers running with the standard of the Confederate flag in their arm, and Charleston White was right. He was right on that. You had a lot of black Confederate slaves who fought for the Confederacy, and they were winning prior to the Union Army, because the Union Army didn't even want to have blacks fighting for them. The problem, the thing was, the North was actually racist, but the only reason why they had the problem with the Southerners, because the Southerners had free labor, and they didn't have free labor. They was more industrial, where the South was more agricultural. But due to that bill that was signed back in the Civil War, that people could be a corporation. I forgot the name of the bill. It came up in a couple years ago during the Bush administration, where the people are actually a corporation. I'll bring it up in another video, but anyhow, the Confederacy had a lot of their army was made up of mostly they black slaves. They fought a lot of battles and won a lot of battles, and they were winning so much, even though they had put a blockade against French ships from supplying the Confederacy, because the French were siding with the Confederates due to the fact that the British was siding with the English, with the Americans, I mean. And the French and the British had a naval war. So another thing too, the British had a blockade on slave ships. So the French were still also dealing in slavery, like the Portuguese, the Spanish. So every time the British seen Spanish, French, and Portuguese and Dutch ships, they would go and chase their ass down. The British chased them down. Not saying that the British was any goddamn better than them, because they had slaves too. They just was trying to they was blockading them. It was economic reasons why they wanted to stop slavery. It wasn't because it was a goddamn moral thing to do. Let's keep it 100. They weren't doing it because it was moral. They were trying to destroy the backbone of the Americas economically, and they did that even during the Revolutionary War, because they knew even then The Union was the Revolutionary Army was using black slave soldiers to fight the British. So the British said, "I tell you what, if any blacks that are slaves come fight with us, we'll give you freedom." And black slaves flocked to the ranks of the British. And then people like, well, they trade. I said, how they gonna trade? They were slaves. They'll have no loyalty to you. It's just like the chick that was against that was basically was a snitch for the FBI. This black chick, and she said that she didn't like Martin Luther King because he was anti-American. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. You had a lot of the Southern whites who fought for the Union because they didn't have no jobs in the South. The Southerners had free labor. So these poor white people who lived in the mountains of Tennessee and shit like that in Kentucky, the Union offered them jobs if they come fight for the Union. So a lot of Southerners went to fight for the Union. So that's why if anybody that sit up there and tell, when you see all these Civil War reenactments and shit, they it's only a couple units that have down there in the South that when they do the reenactments, they'll have black Confederate soldiers. And a lot of that, when they do them reenactments of the Civil War, they don't never show you where the South had a majority Confederate slave army, but they did. Most of their soldiers were slaves or convicts that they forced to fight. They also had what you call white convicts that they forced to fight. So there in history, they've been telling you, that's why if you want to know why you'll have a lot of black people in the South with Confederate flags, that is one of the reasons why they have Confederate flags. Over and out.